Hello everyone. I wanted to do something a little bit different today. I wanted to actually use a little bit of my area of expertise. Even though I am not officially an expert in breeding because I'm only a few years in and still learning, I am what I would consider an expert in ball python care. The thing is, I do have an 18-year-old ball python that I've had since a yearling, and she's in flawless health. She hasn't slowed down at all. She still has a bit of that puppy energy, if you know what I'm saying. And I of course have many other ball pythons, many of which I've had for years, that are also in terrific health. I've also had no problem troubleshooting any issue that may arise myself without going to an outside source or by just doing a little bit of quick research. Because of course anyone can keep a rugged reptile alive, such as ball pythons, for a few years. Pretty much everyone does. A ball python can continue to be alive and to eat and to even grow under conditions such as neglect, improper care, or abuse. This kind of actually leads a lot of people to inadvertently miscare for their animals, thinking that they're perfectly fine when they could actually be experiencing long-term suffering, because it does take them so long to show any real symptoms of that suffering, to lose weight to the point where you can tell that they are underweight, or to develop a health issue. And it all, of course, depends on what kind of poor care or neglect they're experiencing as to what symptoms will arise and when. But the general consensus seems to be that these animals do take a long time for it to be really noticeable that you have done something very wrong. When you are looking to someone for expertise or care advice, ask not only how many animals they care for and which species, but how long they have kept a single animal healthy, alive, and thriving. And preferably showing signs of good mental health. So an interesting little way I've decided to go about this discussion is to pull up questions that I commonly see on Facebook groups such as Ball Python Lovers, where people are asking for problem solving or troubleshooting or care advice or how to get started. This group is typically very beginner oriented, and there aren't as many experienced and knowledgeable keepers on there, and you can tell usually by the content and the questions asked. And while I do this, I'll be caring for my own ball pythons. It is spot cleaning day. Figured this would be a good time to kind of ramble while keeping my hands busy. Now, as a disclaimer, this video in itself is not a replacement for actual research, nor are these Facebook groups. Actual research and understanding a species before you buy it is not just asking a question in a group or getting a little booklet you got at Petco or having some employee at a pet store answer a few questions for you. That is not research. It is a small piece of a very large subset of data that you should be acquiring over time. My belief is that the minimum between the amount of time that you decide to get a reptile and when you actually get that reptile should be 1 month. 1 month minimum. Reason being is I believe this is the minimum amount of time you need to do genuine and reliable research and to actually mull over this idea long enough to know that it is not an impulse decision, but something that you genuinely want and a decision that you make informed and that will result in a much better outcome for you and your new reptile, or any animal. Now, the most effective use of this month of research before you acquire your animal is to pull information from various different sources, hopefully reliable sources, and compare and contrast the data. Whichever bits of information show up the most often or are the most agreed upon tend to yield the best results and have the strongest scientific evidence-based backing, should be the information that you can confidently say is probably accurate, at least for the time being. Things are always changing, and we're, especially with reptiles, learning as we go. Even the best science right now is very incomplete and very young, and we are always kind of picking up new things and new ideas that we had no idea about before. So stay up to date on your research. Never stop looking things up. Read new papers and studies. Maybe pick up a new book here and there. If you know someone else who you consider an expert or a reliable source or that has been keeping for a very long time, see how they're doing, what information they have heard and what they have picked up. This not only gives you a good wealth of knowledge, but it also increases your confidence in being able to decipher good information from bad information over time. It's like a muscle that you flex. The more that you do it, the better that you get at it. The better that you get at reading this information, understanding the words that you're seeing, being able to pick out what is opinion and what is science. That is very important. We should always be striving for not what we want for the animals, but what we believe that they want, and use the science to kind of put those pieces together to figure out what that is. Alright, hopefully that's enough of a disclaimer. Sorry for rambling, and let's get into the actual content. Okay, we have our first question. This one comes from Ball Python Keepers Group for Nice People. This is another beginner-oriented group. My ball python was off of food for around a year due to the person I trusted her with neglecting her. It's been 4 weeks since she started eating again, and she's eaten 4 small rats. She's also shed twice in the past 4 weeks. It's been 2 days since her last eat, but she's actually acting starving and wanting another. Should I still wait until next week, or should I be feeding her now since she's hungry? She's been acting like this since the first rat. She never seems satisfied. Thanks. So here's the thing to understand about these. Just because an animal acts hungry doesn't mean that it should be fed. This goes without saying for almost all species. I mean, just look at people. How often do we eat when we really don't need to, or when we're not actually all that hungry? It's just habitual. It's important to note that with a growing ball python, particularly in their first 3 years or before they're sexually mature, they do grow at a faster rate, and therefore they want to instinctively consume more calories to facilitate that growth, especially in adult females who are building follicles. There'll be a lot of instances where they will fluctuate throughout their life and they will need extra calories. But there are also times that they will act hungry and not actually need anything. Now remember that too, pythons are opportunistic feeders, and food does not always come around, it is not always guaranteed, so they often feel that they have to take advantage of those opportunities. But you are not helping your animal by overfeeding it. If you have fed it recently, you fed it an adequately sized meal. Do not give in, just like if a cat meows a whole lot over their food bowl when you just fed them 2 hours ago, it is not beneficial to them to be overweight or to grow too quickly. There's something really important that I found out from raising my girl Lucille, is that slow growing is probably the healthiest thing to do. Now I understand if you are breeding that you have incentive to grow them a little bit faster and to feed them more. However, if you have the option and if you don't have a specific reason to grow them quickly or to put weight on them, keep it at a steady pace. The slower growth is much healthier and they will develop much more steadily. They also won't get a lot of unhealthy extra fats that they really don't need. Another important point is that it actually takes a ball python more like 12 to 14 days to fully digest an adequately sized meal, more so for larger snakes and larger prey items, of course. But you want to give them an adequate amount of time to finish that digestive process, because if they are always in the process of digesting, then their internal organs never really rest and they never experience that increased metabolism and energy level that comes after they are finished digesting and ready to search for their next meal. Back when Lucille was growing up, she was fed about weekly in her first year to year and a half, and then she very quickly switched to an every 2-week regimen. Now that she's a full-grown adult, they really don't need to eat more than every 2 to 3, sometimes 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the season. And if you are feeding a ball python weekly for whatever reason, maybe because they're still young, occasionally give them a break to give them a little bit of additional digestion time. Something I always do with my snakes, even my babies that are over a few months old, is I will feed consistently for a month or two and then I'll skip a week or two and give them an opportunity to sort of rest and digest and get all of the poop cleared out and everything. And it seems to actually improve their appetite for the next round of feedings. This is also a way that I've been able to ensure that my ball pythons consistently maintain a healthy appetite and don't take extended forced breaks from eating, because if you are giving them too many calories too often and they are way too confident that there's a lot of food around, or if they feel overfed and they don't have a break, they will force it on you and they will probably start an extended fast. Alright, here's another one from, this time, ball python lovers. Y'all ever let y'all's noodles take a dip in a kid's swimming pool for a minute? So you've probably heard a lot of people say this and you've probably heard a lot of people argue with it. But I do not recommend doing this, at least not putting a ball python in a pool or a large body of water. Not that they would never enjoy a dip or a swim of some kind. The concern is that you don't actually know whether or not they want to be doing it at that time, if the temperature of the water might be uncomfortable for them, which is not unlikely, especially if it's hose water in a kid's swimming pool. That water usually comes out fairly cool. The water dish in their enclosure is a whole different thing because it eventually regulates itself and matches the temperature in the enclosure, which is obviously safe for them. And they can choose to go in and out when they please. Now, if it is a particularly hot season and you want to offer your ball python additional, moisture, humidity, water, an opportunity to soak, just put a larger dish of water in their enclosure, something that they can fit their whole body in, and they can choose to go in and out on their own. And then you know that you won't be forcing something uncomfortable on them, stressing them out. Again, I'll say this isn't necessarily always a huge deal, but these animals give very little cues as to when they are truly not okay with something or when they're not in the mood. Some of them are a little more obvious than others, but some of them are extremely subtle. This is a very sort of friendly, calm, tolerant animal, and they will probably just put up with you more than they will protest whatever is going on, which means you could be putting them through extreme stress and have no idea about it. Again, instead, just put a large dish in their enclosure and see if they go in and out of it on their own. And if not, I guess they weren't in the mood for a swim. I would also like to connect this topic to taking your animals out for a walk in a public place, such as a mall or a fair or a store or something. Please do this very sparingly. Make sure that the temperatures are in a safe range, mostly being mid-70s, maybe up to mid-80s, but if it's more or less than that, they're probably going to be uncomfortable most of the time, to be honest. So try to just avoid putting stressful situations on your snake forcibly. There's plenty of ways to give them the choice to get fresh air, to explore, or get extra enrichment without putting them in a situation that might be extremely stressful or have negative consequences later on. Here's another question from ball python lovers. Hi, my ball python now weighs 497 grams. Should he be eating small rats? So thankfully, the answer to this is fairly simple. The width of the prey item should simply be the width of the midsection of your snake. Maybe a little bit more if you want growth and a little bit less if you want to maintain. Really, really easy. So more than likely a 497 gram python. Now this could vary depending on their length versus their girth. So to me this isn't the best metric and it can get a little bit confusing. Yes, it's very precise and down to the number, but the actual answer is just so much easier than that. Make sure that the width of the rat, particularly the rat's hips, is about the same width as your ball python's midsection or the thickest part of their body. This will ensure that they get adequate nutrition, that they don't take too long to digest a meal, and that they will grow at a regular rate. If you notice that your ball python is at all struggling with the size of the meal that you are feeding, or if they're too intimidated by it, or if they are just completely turned off, you could try going down a size. It's just as important to read your snake's behavior as well as their body condition. Now some people will say that using the girth rule is overfeeding. I have seen 110% absolutely no evidence for that. Overfeeding is defined by feeding excessively large prey items or feeding way too often to the point where your ball python never has an opportunity to rest and finish their digestion process. So if you look at the girth of Lolita right here, who's my Candino female, and she'll be a rooter this year, it looks to me like she's about just the right width to be on medium rats. Now, small and medium can have a different definition depending on where you buy them from, but I get from Rodent Pro, which is a very common prey item retailer. So yeah, I would say probably about medium rats, and she's growing fast, so she might even go up from there. I don't know. Typically, adult females are kind of perpetually always good on mediums, but some really big chunky girls could even do with a large. As a side note, I'd like to point out that usually the frozen feeders that you get from PetSmart and Petco are overpriced and undersized, so please be sure to do your research and compare prices before you buy. You could be spending $14 on a feeder that should only cost you $4. Back in the house. This is where you live. No. Okay, from ball python lovers. Gonna be a long one, so bear with me. What's a good healthy average weight for a female ball python? Around 29-ish inches. I've been getting mixed answers on the almighty Google. I acquired my girl, who needed a new home ASAP, back in May 27th. She was about 200 grams on an empty stomach. Last meal prior to that weigh-in, I was told, was 2 weeks. She's roughly 2.5 to 3 years old. So obviously very underweight and stunted. As of July 14th, she's up to 272 grams. She hasn't eaten for about 1.5 weeks due to going into shed and had a big poop at the same time. Is 72 grams in about 50 days a good increase? She's eating one roughly 35 to 40 gram weaned rat pup a week currently. First 4 pictures are of the day I got her, followed by current. She does look very skinny from the pictures. This is a good question, one I see relatively often, because there are a lot of people in these groups that tend to rescue or take on secondhand animals. Or what they think is out of the goodness of their heart, get an animal from a store that they really shouldn't be buying them from. But to answer the question simply, It's hard to say what a normal weight is for a snake of any given length or age because, again, they all vary. Some ball pythons can eat incredibly well and still stay extremely small or grow at a much slower pace than their counterparts. A lot of this has to do with genetics and lineage, but sometimes it's just kind of a random thing of chance. And I think it's unknown, but some people have suggested that certain morphs tend to grow better than others. Hard to know how valid that is, but I guess it's not impossible. So this little girl Annabelle here is about 3 years old now, so she's more than breeding size and breeding age, but she's probably about 500 to 600 grams smaller, if not more, than my other females of this same age. Now, the reason that I bring this up is that you don't want to be judging your animal's progress or health based on some average weight, because there really isn't one. Just the fact that this poster mentioned that their snake had already gained weight since they acquired it is basically all that you need to know. Now, what's more important than weight or food to these animals is hydration. Now, thankfully, with a whole prey diet, they get a lot of hydration from the feeder item because most living things are mostly water. If you are really concerned and you want to increase their appetite and improve their prognosis, a soak is not a bad idea, usually for about 30 minutes. Want to know if your snake is a healthy weight, what you don't want to see is any sort of protruding spine, especially ribs. That's a severe case. But if your snake has a nice, slightly rounded exterior with no visible bones, good muscle tone, and you can tell the difference too when you handle them. You don't want them to feel limp. You don't want them to be floppy or to cave in. You want them to have a little bit of resistance and a bit of muscle pushing back at you. That's a really good sign. So as long as your snake is eating, is pooping normally, if their scales are lustrous, smooth, and shiny, rather than kind of dry and flaky, you are probably fine, especially if you see any kind of increase in weight. The only time you should really be concerned is if their condition does not visibly improve in any way, if they appear to continue to be dehydrated, or if they are not bright and alert. If they are limp and they're not moving around much and they appear to not really be fighting for life, then you're probably in sort of a it's too late type situation, or you should see a veterinarian. Again, these animals are very rugged and they can take a lot and they can bounce back from almost anything. Alright, so this next question also in ball python lovers. Hi everyone. I recently bought live feeder rats from my local reptile store when I got home. I noticed they had tiny moving red dots on them. I was told by Google that these might be mites, called the store, and they said the feeders are final sale. Red dots are probably dirt mites. It wouldn't harm my snakes. Has anyone dealt with these before? Should I be concerned? And what's your opinion? So thankfully they are right. These are just dirt or wood mites, which can be a little bit annoying but are not actually harmful to the animal. Mites that you should be concerned about are black or dark brown, and that would be snake mites. If it has to do with bedding, you can always freeze bedding before you're putting it in an enclosure, or you can remove bedding from an enclosure that's already in there, and again put it in the freezer, put it back after a couple of days, and that will kill any living buggies in it. In the case of live rats, unfortunately, you're a little more SOL because you can't freeze them like you can frozen feeders. This is one of the reasons that I use frozen feeders, is that I know that the freezing process will kill anything that would have been on or in them. One thing that you can do is coat your rats in olive oil for a couple of days. The reason being is that this is not harmful to the snake. They'll just pass it right out, and the oil will actually suffocate anything that is feeding on the animal itself. You can also do this for the snakes. If you are dealing with snake mites, that's a whole different animal, that's a whole different process, and not something I have time to go over in depth in this video. If you would like a video on that, let me know and I'll do one. Okay, here's a fun one. Hi, just curious why no one warned me that my snakes were going to be relieving themselves all over me. I still love them, I really do, but my birds came with a warning and people consistently ask me, don't they poop everywhere? No, they don't. My snakes urinate on me more often than my birds poop on me. And when my snake does it, it's a full shower and change of clothes. A simple sandy wipe takes care of birds. Can't be the only one, right? If so, did I miss the memo on what not to wear? Okay, so yeah, this is a little bit abnormal. A lot of ball pythons don't do this, and usually the reason that they do this, especially often, means that they are petrified. Just like some other species in the animal kingdom, relieving themselves and leaving a big stinky poop or a big wet urate is kind of a way to get away from predators, because unappealing smells makes them less appealing to eat. So if your animal is doing this, it means one of two things. Either your timing is really shit and they just really have to go the moment that you pick them up, or you are not approaching the handling situation properly. Especially with young and inexperienced ball pythons, You have to remember that, for one, time moves very, very slow. And adapting to changes takes a long while, and you have plenty of time because these animals can live 30 to 40 years if you do a good job. So it's not like you don't have time to develop a relationship with them and teach them what is and what is not a danger. Typically, especially with young individuals, if you are acting like a predator, they're a lot more likely to be afraid. Now, what does that mean, acting like a predator? Well, are you coming in too fast? Are you looming over them? Are you reaching in from above? Are you just grabbing them and pulling them out rather than allowing them to kind of initiate or get comfortable with the interaction before it is forced on them? Now, instinctually, whenever something approaches a ball python, it will usually either hide or strike or alleviate itself before it thinks. So give it an opportunity to think. So open the enclosure, just sit by, and allow them to realize that you are not there to attack them. Usually what you'll see is they will freeze for a moment and they will try to assess. Another sign that they are trying to figure out what's going on and that they've kind of moved to the next step of this is they will start to tongue flick. Longer, slower tongue flicks means that they are more relaxed and trying to take in more information. As shorter, quicker tongue flicks means that they are unsure but they are still trying to assess while not moving too much as to give away their position. This is a case-by-case basis, but that's usually how it goes. So after standing by and being in smelling range for a few minutes, usually you can approach a little bit, maybe offer a hand or something that they can smell or that they can see is not a threat, and then instead of just grabbing them and moving too quickly, try to gently scoop under them without doing any kind of grabbing. And you don't ever want to clutch. Try to avoid clutching. The more that you restrict their movement, the more that they will associate what you're doing with predatory behavior, and it will make them much more uncomfortable. And even if they're not fearful, they will be frustrated because animals don't like to have their movement restricted. Sometimes if you do this enough and you do it frequently enough and you can teach them to not associate handling with something that is scary or uncomfortable, they may actually initiate the interaction, and when you open an enclosure, they will approach you rather than you having to approach them. This doesn't necessarily mean that they like you, but it does mean that they are familiar enough with you and they know not to fear you and that you're not going to cause them any harm. This is the ideal scenario. And again, time moves slow for them, so it can take a while. Another way that you can help with this is by not harassing them. Do not try to handle them daily. Don't try to handle them during inconvenient times like when they're shedding or in the early stages of digestion. Be sure to give them breaks. Breaks are extremely important for ball pythons. Giving them a break allows them an opportunity to process what has just happened, to relax, to rest, to feel secure in their environment, to complete their digestion or their poop or their shed or whatever it is. Give them a few days to a week every now and then just completely left alone where you do nothing except maybe reach in for a spot clean or change some water. Okay, this is the last one I'm going to talk about in this video. This is not necessarily a question, but this is a very deeply problematic issue. Got George out for some nice sunlight this evening. Gonna be sad when he's all grown. Let's think on that for a minute. Gonna be sad when he's grown. Why would one be sad about the animal that they are raising and caring for hitting important life stages? Because there isn't much other information provided, I can only assume that this is kind of the puppy problem. Whereas an animal is very desirable when it is young and playful and baby-like, but once it grows up, it's boring and it's not as fun anymore, it's not as cute. This is an unfortunate mindset because, I mean, already animals are abandoned all the time when they grow up, cats and dogs included, which are some of the most popular pets. But imagine a ball python, an animal that is often misunderstood, doesn't give a lot of love back, doesn't have much in the way of personality, and is already considered boring even as a baby. Now, I can only assume that when this animal does grow up, it'll probably be rehomed. This is one of the biggest problems I think that we have with ball pythons, is that there are so many of these animals. They're being bred all the time. They live very, very long lifespans, and they are very frequently rehomed before they become full grown. If you buy any animal, unless of course you are a breeder, you are just temporarily watching an animal, or you have the intent to rescue, rehab, and then Intend to keep that animal for the duration of its life, understanding that it will get older, it will get bigger, it will get less cute, it will slow down, and decide to love it anyway. This also ties into the conversation about lack of research. If you don't fully understand an animal or a species before you buy it, and then you are unpleasantly surprised by some quality or trait that it has or need that it has that doesn't really suit you or your lifestyle or your personality, you're much more likely to not keep that animal. The more that an animal is rehomed, the more health issues it's going to have, the more personality problems it's going to have, the more stress it's going to experience, it's going to affect its immune system, it's going to affect its lifespan, it's going to affect the quality of the experience that the next keeper has. So it is really important that we realize that animals are living things, that they have needs, that their species is unique to them, and they are not like other animals as much as we may want to make them like other animals. Because you did what would be considered a good job getting them to the next life stage, getting them to grow and to eat, and all of the things that are supposed to happen to the point that it actually gets bigger, God forbid. Ball pythons are medium to larger snakes. There are many much smaller snakes or smaller reptiles that you could get that will stay smaller and cuter for longer. But you should know this before you buy the animal. You should make this decision before, like at least, again, a month before you actually purchase the thing. Know what it needs, how it grows, how big it gets, and decide that you're going to love it and want it now and then, please. I think the more that we understand these animals, the more research that we do, and the more that we try to understand what it is that we are caring for, I think the more that we can appreciate them beyond things that are superficial, such as how cute or how small that they are. Alright guys, now in the interest of not making this video too long, I'm going to cut it off here and finish up with my cleanings, but thank you for sticking with me to the end. Let me know if you have any questions or if you'd like to see more content like this. I hadn't really intended to make content like this, but it's just something that keeps kind of coming up as I check in with these groups and see what's going on and see the needs and the questions that people have, and figured I would kind of contribute to the conversation a little bit, given that I do have experience and I do have knowledge to share. Thank you all for watching. Remember to kiss your snakes, and I'll see you in the next one. Say goodbye, Jagger. Say goodbye.